Welcome to everyone with us today and those of you joining us via our recording. We have one question posted. Dan had posted this for us, and it relates to an instance in therapy where he was using the method, the interpersonal downward arrow, and then noticed it wasn't landing as well as he was hoping that it might, and doing something that I would recommend all of us do, then analyzing that afterwards and saying, what happened there? And Dan noticed that perhaps he had made a couple of errors that was contributing to the aborted landing of that particular method with that particular patient. So raise your hand if you have had this moment in time. Yeah, many of us have. Okay, I've got this great, cool method. Oh my God, what just happened? So you're in good company, Dan, of a community that fails forward. And we'd love to hear from you about this moment in time with this particular patient.
Yeah, so the reason I brought it was because whilst I was able to identify a number of errors that I made, there were still errors that I think that I made, but that I would like to get clarification on. So this is a patient who I've been working with really rather successfully, just using standard kind of DML. There was a patient who was having angry outbursts and making, by his own judgment, unwise decisions in the midst of those angry outbursts. And he wanted to make better decisions. And we've, as I say, we've done a really good piece of work. He sort of really came on board with many of the methods, loved the positive reframe. And we go to a session, and I actually thought that he was good. He's a private client, so, and he's self-funding, so it's an expensive business for him. And I actually had the hypothesis that he'd probably say, I think we're done now. And I was going to do sort of blueprinting, relapse management. How do we consolidate the learning? But he said, actually, what I'd like to do is maybe think about my relationships a bit more. I've got some really heavyweight relationships that I'd like to make them somewhat less heavy. And I made a number of errors, one of which was jumping to the conclusion that I knew the answer. Oh, I've got this great tool. I know this is going to be perfect. And so a couple of the obvious errors that I made was that I didn't really clarify a goal with my patient. If this went really well, what would happen? And then the second thing was that I really made like a very basic error in so much as I didn't offer. I asked for a moment in time with a particular relationship where he felt this heavy weight. But I didn't ask him whether he wanted to improve this relationship or not, or whether he wanted it to stay the same, or whether indeed he wanted it to end. And I just jumped in 2 feet into a method. And actually, as it turns out, he doesn't really want to do anything with this relationship, which I think was one of the reasons. So there was lots for me to reflect on and improve on. And that was all good learning. But in the midst of the method, before I'd even realized those errors, whilst I was in the method, I was kind of really felt like I was floundering. And I don't think I was floundering because of those aspects. I would have eventually, I think, come unstuck because of those aspects. But I just wasn't sure what the right descriptors were that went in each of these boxes. And then once I started getting confused, I really almost lost the why are we doing this again? Rationale for the whole piece as well. So I sent Daniel a copy. I've anonymized it, and I'd be happy to share. It's really messy. It's really not me anywhere near my best. But then again, I do fall over quite regularly. So I'd be lying to say I rarely make such errors.
All right, Dan, thanks for the succinct summary. Been making some notes here. This fellow you've been doing some cognitive work with, and you both, it sounds like, have liked what's been happening there. So there's a lot of backstory there in terms of creating a therapeutic alliance, creating a safe environment, setting an agenda that was shared, bringing eventually the right methods forward, resetting some thinking. Good on you for this wise and generous work that you've provided this patient. And it was good enough to your eye that you were thinking about, I think maybe we're done. You know, he's self-panned for this. This is pricey. Maybe we'll wrap things up and give him a roadmap and say toodaloo. And then, as patients have a way of doing, he surprised you and said, actually, doctor, I would like to work on some heavyweight relationships in my life. And you, being a good sport, said, oh, all right, let's do that. So a lot to like in this picture so far. You have been doing good enough work. You have raised motivation or curiosity on this person's part to do more than you knew he wanted to do. Perhaps looking at the success that he was having with you and going, wow, talking to Dr. White is helpful. Gee, maybe we can talk about my relationships.
Yeah,
right?
maybe.
Yeah. And then you notice that a couple pieces went missing when you pivoted. And I'm not surprised that they did. When we get surprised in therapy, we temporarily, hopefully, lose our orientation. Okay, testing, empathy, agenda setting, methods. Let's start at the beginning. Like, we've been having success. Oh, let's have some more success. Okay, let's throw some 5 secrets at that. Let's do right? We start taking shortcuts.
Yeah.
And good on us for that enthusiasm. We're on a roll here. Let's keep rolling. I like that about us. And I think our patients like it about us too. Things are going swimmingly. Let's swim to that island. Here we go. Yeah. And in your enthusiasm, you notice that there was a first question that didn't get asked. Let's say, patients, that we had success in this new realm, the interpersonal realm, that was like unto the success we've experienced when it comes to angry outbursts and unwise decisions downstream and so forth. Yeah, what would be different for you? And without that orientation point, it's a little like a nautical image is coming to mind for me. We're trying to get to the island, but we don't have the lighthouse. So we can sail, right? We're sailing, we're moving forward, but are we moving towards a destination that's salient, that we have agreed we want to sail towards and have done some careful agenda setting? Are we willing to bring to the table what we would need to sail forward towards that destination? So I could see that getting into a method without having done that, things could start feeling very disorganized and disorienting. Now, what are we doing? Why are we doing?
Yeah.
And it sounds like part of the disorganization or disorientation for you is what's a role? Wait, what's a role? Yeah.
Yep.
And you'd like perhaps us to speak to both of those points, the agenda setting errors, what we can do that would be protective against that, and then clarify some of the descriptors that we're using with that particular method.
And certainly the latter, the former of those 2 points is like obvious to me now, but the latter is still, and it might be a symptom of the former problem, and like you say, that I might be all at sea because I was heading to one island and my client was, thinking about another island, and neither of which was aware, was highlighted. But even in the midst of that, the actual sailing, I felt like I couldn't actually sail.
Yeah, I have these lines flapping around and the
Yeah,
mainsail's backwinded, and
yeah,
what's going on here?
yeah. Even if I did want to go over there, I don't know how to get the boat in that direction.
Okay, very good. Well, one thing, Dan, that came to mind for me was uh, if a patient says to me, I would like to do relational work, um, the first thing I would say would be, well, tell me about the relationship you would like to work on.
Yeah, yeah.
And to provide empathy for the person in the relationship in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Before
Mm-hmm.
we sail anywhere else, let me
Yeah.
understand your experience of this marriage or this parent-child or this colleague or whoever it would be to establish a human connection.
Yeah.
Did that happen?
No.
That didn't happen. Okay.
No.
So that could be another error.
Yeah, for sure.
Could you and I agree to not recreate the error right now by inviting our community to offer you a bit of empathy right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be lovely. And community, we have some heavyweights and some lightweights, and I'm not making any judgments here on the empathy front. How about giving Dan some love right now?
Dan, I have not felt this unalone in ages. I am absolutely floored and delighted at just the matter-of-fact way you're talking about errors and with the humility that you are doing it. I am scared witless about starting my own private practice, and you are providing a model of how I would like to approach it. So I am very moved and yeah, your vulnerability is so stunning and I feel so close to you and lucky to be here.
Oh, okay. That's so moving to hear. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate hearing your voice too, and the fact you've chosen to really voice it toward me it's very, very moving. Thank you. And it may be a bit of a shield, the matter of fact thing. I've been like, it's evening here in the UK, and pretty much since finishing work, I was like, I've sent Daniel that thing. I can't get out of this now. I'm going to have to really reveal my flaws. Let's really go for it. Let's just do it properly then. Let's really just go all in if that's what I'm going to do. But thank you for that. It was very kind words.
Yeah, I agree with Erica, Dan. I just think you're such a good-hearted person, and it is like eating a piece of humble pie when we, realize, oops, I messed up here on a few levels. And to even realize that in the session with the patient, right? And I remember first learning team. I mean, all throughout team, I've had my share of errors, but I remember thinking like, okay, what is even the next step?
Yeah.
Like, sometimes they throw you some curveballs, you get off track, and then, or, oh, what is this method? How can I describe this to this patient? And literally like taking out cheat sheets to look at and read it off the list and mea culpa to the patient that, okay. But as Daniel said, sometimes these errors have their own beauty. And I think when we can own up to our own faults and foibles and failings with our patient, that we're more relatable, and it kind of destigmatizes whatever they've gone through in their life where they've made errors and they have their own faults and foibles. And this is the team method is no joke. I mean, it's a beautiful method, but it takes so long to have a grasp of even the basic first 50, count them 50 methods, much less the other 50, all of which I don't even know what they are yet. And so we're all works in progress, and I'm guessing every single one of us here is relating to what you're saying, and this is how we learn, right? When someone makes a mistake, we can kind of be there vicariously because we either made that mistake or we're going to make that mistake, or here's a chance to not make that particular mistake. I'll make some other ones. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So good on you for bringing that forward.
Thank you. From someone with such expertise, that's very kind words. Thank you.
How is this empathy feeling on your side, Dan?
It's always more moving than you anticipate, right? It's I'm already kind of like, well, thank goodness I bought this problem. Here's me thinking it was going to be a real ordeal, a difficult hour, and already I'm like, oh, I can't believe I almost didn't do this. So yeah, very, very moving, powerful words.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing who and how you are. And I would second both Carol and Erica's words. When Erica said, I aspire to be like Dan White, I thought, yeah, me too. That's the way we develop and grow, is by doing what we do, taking a look at it, reaching out, adding some IQ points. Then we're on a path that I believe would be a sustainable professional development path, maybe for the next 100 years. If we're doing that, we could be a little better each day. And that's probably a big part of the reason that I go into my office each morning. I can be a little better today than I was yesterday. Oh, yeah, that sounds good. Let's see what that would look like, what I'd be saying, what I'd be doing, and so forth. So
I'd just like to add, sorry, just before we move from this, that it's testament, Daniel, to the group that you've set up, though, that I can be just so, safe to talk about, like something that a moment in time that I am far from proud of. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And then also, with the model that David's introduced, there was a structure for me to reflect on in a way that was really super helpful. Like, I definitely, when I think about it, that didn't happen, and that didn't happen, and that didn't happen. So it's no wonder that, and that's really, really powerful too, when you're just in the weeds of therapy and not entirely certain where you are. So I'd just like to make those comments, really.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I feel seen and appreciated and grateful to you. I agree, to create a space, a community of fellow travelers that feels safe, where we can be who we really are and not be holding up some little cutout. Hey, look at me. That is a wonderful accomplishment. And some of my betters in the team community have modeled for me how we create such a space. And so I just follow in their footsteps. And for those of you who are creating or who will be creating your own communities, I think a big part of the safety is being open about our own errors and omissions. Jacob Towery, he co-teaches a group of residents at Stanford, and he makes a point, at least the last I talked to Jacob, of opening every new section with a description of big errors that he's made. So these medical students, I teach medical students at Georgetown, and oftentimes they're kind of primed to go, gee, I'm supposed to be a doctor. I'm supposed to know stuff. I can't make mistakes, blah, blah, blah. And so Jacob, a practicing psychiatrist, starts off by saying, okay, guys, listen up. I'm going to tell you about the biggest mistake I ever made with a patient. Can't believe I made it, but I did. And here's what it was. So he doesn't say to people, hey, be open-hearted. He shows up in a way that those of you who know Jacob, I think he's hardwired just to be an open-hearted dude. And he does what he can do to co-create safety by being open about the fact that he makes mistakes. And those mistakes have real consequences in the therapy in individuals' lives. So I don't know of any other way that's as powerful as that. And so I just do what I've been told to do. It tends to work out pretty well. All right, so Dan, perhaps we can see another dimension to this therapy, that a piece went missing, which might have influenced the course of therapy. If you'd hung out with this patient, can we give him a first name?
Yeah, Tim.
James?
Tim, but James will do as well.
James. Yeah, JT, we could call him.
Yeah, okay, JT, cool. Let's compromise.
We'd hung out with JT and said, so JT, tell me about this relationship, which might have been part of the specificity. Let's talk about one relationship in one moment in time.
Yeah.
Because that will contain the DNA of the whole relationship, which is the patient's DNA. We don't need to know all the moments, but if we don't have that one moment, we can't sequence the genome.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way things are going to change is if we can sequence the genome. What are you doing in this relationship? What aren't you doing? What are the agenda pieces that play into your doing this and not other things, and so forth? Yeah. Which I would see as the big picture descriptor of the IPDA. What's the genetic material in the relationship? The roles, the feelings, the rules. That captures, I think, 99% of the genetic material. So going forward, we could all learn from this error that you made, Dan, that I make regularly as well, to discount or set aside empathy and remind ourselves, if we're going to take on a new piece of work together, even with a patient who we have an excellent therapeutic alliance with, we better hang out in the empathy sector. And if you had said to me, Dan, when I invited you to do that with us, no, Daniel, I think we're good, I would have asked a checking question. Does anyone know what the checking question would have been?
I'll take a guess.
Yeah, please.
So could it be something like, do you want to be close to this person?
Oh, that's an excellent guess. I think that's better than what I had in mind. Yeah, I like that a lot. What I was thinking was this: if Dan said to me, no, I'm good, I would have said to him, are you thinking something bad might happen if we did touch bases on the empathy front? Because sometimes people will be saying, oh, that would be a waste of the group's time, right? They'll be saying, no, I'm good, instead of saying, no, I feel a little anxious about being that open and vulnerable, right? It's kind of like if we walked up and said to someone, "Would you like a hug?" And they say, "No, I'm good." I'd be a little curious about that response. Now, if I haven't showered or something, we might explain that response in one way. But many of us who are offered a hug would say, "Yeah, bring it on. Right? Feels good. Get some dopamine, get some oxytocin flowing. Why not?" So if someone goes, "No, I'm good," I'd be a little bit curious before I would accept that answer and move on. Does that make sense? Yeah. And Dan didn't say, "No, I'm good." He said, "Okay, sure. That sounds good." And then that opened a wonderful door for us to walk through, and we're walking through it right now. So moving right along, the next stop would be the moment in time once we've empathized and JT has said, "Yeah, Dan, you get it. Thanks. This has been good. Does me good to tell you what I've been feeling in this relationship and to get some love from Dr. White." And now, yeah, what else do you have for me? We could say, what I have for you, JT, is a question. What's the point of our doing anything else? Or have we accomplished what you were looking for? To express the suffering that you're experiencing in this relationship and to have that received in a kind and respectful way. And right there, JT might say, "No, I think we're done."
I think you're right.
Yeah, tell me what comes up for you, Dan.
Yeah, so I was trying to fix his relationships, or starting to fix his relationships. My sense is he wanted to feel better about being in a difficult situation that he doesn't really want to fix. And I think that had I gone through things more slowly and certainly offered the empathy piece, my suspicion is that may well have been enough for him. Actually, if I'd done that well enough, because in lots of ways it's quite a real problem for him. It's not like full of distortion. There are sort of genuine hurdles that he has to navigate here, and I think if I'd have empathically listened and done that well, I think he'd have got the sense, yeah, this is tough. And it's okay for me to recognize that. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Daniel, in this. And I said, what more might there be left for us to do? And he might say, that's it. I just needed a moment in time to really recognize this is not how I'd like it to be. This is a moment of suffering for me. I'd like these relationships to be different than they are, but they aren't. And let's still live my life.
Yeah, it's very beautifully said, Dan, that the empathy might have been the method that allowed the person to move into self-acceptance.
Yeah, I think so.
And say, "This is hard. I'm struggling here." Yeah, of course I am.
Yeah, exactly.
And now I'll get on with my life, get on with my struggle.
Yeah.
And while in the team world, we'd say E is a portion of the model that comes before A, it's also in the M. And sometimes it's exactly what the person needs. It is both necessary and sufficient. We empathize, we get on with our life. And patients oftentimes tell me, I feel averse. I tell my friends something. Patient told me this earlier today. And they start like recommending things to me. I don't need recommendations, people.
Yeah.
I'm not here for hear your brilliant ideas. I'm here to receive some human connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I get it in therapy, thank God. But everyone wants to like help me, and I want to smack them. It's so aversive. I can't just be struggling me and get some solidarity from people. And I get advice. And raise your hand if you've ever made that error personally or professionally. Yeah, a struggling person, maybe really struggling. They're bleeding out, right? And we come over and say, well, there's a lot of blood here. I think what you need is some version of pick yourself up by the bootstraps and get over there to the operating room. So let's now, if we can, Dan, move on. And you had a question about the descriptors in the IPDA method.
Yeah.
Maybe we've gotten a bit to the question, why are we doing this, or why would we be doing this to get to the genetic material in a relationship? What questions do you have about the descriptors?
And so whilst I was doing this in real time, I think other than the emotions box, I found it really tricky to know what went where, and I think this is a person that does like to talk quite in a generalized, abstract way. Anyway, so I maybe give myself a break there, in so much as perhaps I wasn't the easiest of individuals to try this with, but that I really lacked specificity, and I ended up really not sure whether I got anywhere close to the categorization of the genetic material under the right terms, for want of a better description. So the sheet I sent you was literally the conversation we had in therapy as I was typing. So it's messy and not spell checked or anything like that. But I was like, wow, I don't even know if we got this close, to be honest.
Okay, so I'd see two possibilities for us here. One would be to begin by talking in a pedagogic way about the descriptive categories, what they are, what they pull for, what they aren't. And then to take up some of the messy clinical material that would help us understand what the struggles were for you with this method in a particular moment in time. Would both of those sound good to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. And then what I'd like to do is invite maybe Carol in as our other faculty member to address the first question. What's a role? Dan's clear on what emotions are. He's ahead of me. I sometimes wonder. Someone says, I feel rejected.
Just to clarify, it's only because there was a big list there that I could point at that I was really that clear.
Yeah, you have a cheat sheet on that one.
Yeah.
It's harder to get a cheat sheet on roles.
Just as
that would be a very long cheat sheet.
Yeah. Tick these off. Which ones apply?
Yeah, Carol, could you speak to what's a rule, what's a role?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever done this exactly the same every single time, Dan. So
that's good to know. That's really good to know.
So I'll give it my best shot. And usually I'm kind of gleaning off what the patient has already told me to give examples, right? To kind of help them first. Like if we're talking about the roles, because you want to start in that far right corner of the roles on the sheet, which seems backwards. We're always thinking we're supposed to go left, right. I guess there's a method to the madness. So we want to start in that top right corner, and just have them describe the different roles of the role of the other person first, right? I should say. So I'll say, well, you mentioned that your partner or friend or whoever kind of is domineering, right? Can you give me some examples of that? Okay, let's write that down, right? What else does your partner do? Well, they're the financial contributor. They're the person that is bringing most of the money into, the household or whatever it is, right? If it's a friendship, it's going to be a different kind of set of things. But so you're going to use with that time, this is probably why you were lost, because you didn't do that empathy thing. So you didn't have a kind of a semblance of an idea of that relationship, right? Until you were in the weeds already, right? So, and then as you hear their role, then you already are having in your head like, oh, and so what's the complementary role that they're playing, right? They're being submissive. This person's dominant, this person's submissive, or this person's controlling and this person is more flexible and acquiescing, right? Or this person's the caretaker, and because you get these kind of opposite roles, and then you get everything in between. So once you start identifying, or they start identifying other ways, and it doesn't have to be like mine actually looks messy. I bet if I pulled out an IDBA, have like things written on the corner and the side, and you'd have all kinds of scribbles because I'm doing it with the patient doing it, and I'm writing it on mine as well, right? They have their version, I have my version. It's hopefully pretty much similar. But there's not enough room on those darn little squares to get it all in anyway, if you're using those paper forms. So I hope that helps you be less self-conscious about what it looks like. It's messy but when we start reading it, then it all starts to make sense. And then so then when you have their roles, they say, oh, well, when they're doing this, what do you do? Right? What's your role in the relationship? Are oh, you're the one that compromises, or, oh, you're the one that nurtures, or you're the one that, right? And they'll both you can list both positive and negative roles in the relationship. And I'll tell them that. It doesn't have to be only the ones that are problematic, right? It can be so you don't have a list of how they're terrible and how your patient is wonderful, right? You want the whole picture. And then say, well, other things might come to you as we continue doing this. So we can continue to add to this. This is not static at all. So that's helpful, because sometimes when you come down to the rules, which is going to be the next section you're going to do, then some other things can come out. And maybe one of the rules, I'll give an example. I'll say to a patient, this is a little harder to sometimes start out with, because you're thinking, well, we don't have any rules. We haven't agreed upon any rules. And they're not rules that you've spoken out loud. They're just things that happen. Like, oh, I know when my partner's mad, don't talk to him, right? Or I know it's not okay for me to cry or show my feelings, or, whatever have you, right? So if you've had that descriptive relationship, you're already sensing what some of these rules might be, and you could just take a guess at it. Well, it seems like there's some kind of rule about, decision making. What's that rule? Right? Well, I get the final say, or they get the final say, or my feelings don't matter, or that kind of thing. And then the last part, and I'll let Daniel do this, is to talk about the feelings, right? How does it feel? What does it feel like to be in this relationship? So I'll hand it back to you. Daniel, let me know if I left anything out or if I was unclear.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. I appreciated your taking us through. That's how I do it too. We ping pong back and forth on the roles. I submit. Oh, okay. And when you're submitting, your wife, oh, she takes control. Good. Let's write that down. So that's a good way to populate both sides. And I agree, Carol. I like to start with the other person's role, because it feels less threatening to talk about what they're doing than to look at what I'm doing. Because most of us want to blame relational malcontent on what that person's doing, and make sure we don't look at, gee, how are we co-creating suffering in a relationship? So starting with them, well, what do they do? Oh, they're controlling. Let's write that down. And then instead of asking the open-ended question, which can be hard to get our heads around, what do you do? we can now just go. So when that person's being controlling, what do you do? Oh, I get angry. Oh, let's write that down in this list. You're angry. And then when you're angry, how do you express that? Oh, I don't. Oh, okay. Let's put that in your role, to be angry and not talk about it. Right? So those three sectors can all interact with each other. And, within 2 minutes, we can have the genome. This is the relationship. Being avoidant, acting out emotion, avoiding conflict. It's all there. And then the leap, which is more challenging, is to get over to the rules. And the way I found is most successful for me is just to go through the patient's roles. Say to JT, okay, JT, you are submissive. Now, why is it important for you to be submissive? Right. Oh, I have to not offend my wife. Oh, let's write that down. That's a rule. I must not offend my wife. And oftentimes the rule, I prep people, I say, have it start out, I must. Don't have it be a should statement. That's not a rule. The sign on the highway doesn't say you should drive 55 or we recommend. It says drive 55 or else. So we want that quality. I must do this or else something bad will happen. And then they can start to connect the dots. I swallow my anger. Oh, why do you do that? Oh, to protect myself and my wife from a bad thing. If I were to voice that anger, someone would get hurt. Oh, good. I must swallow anger. Let's write that down as a rule. Then I see why you're in the role, why you're doing that, why you're swallowing. You're protecting people, yourself, your wife, your marriage, and so forth. Is this helpful, Dan, in terms of?
Yeah, it's really helpful. So it was really interesting to hear both positive and negative aspects. I hadn't really thought of that before. I like the ping-ponging. I did it more list-wise, and I think the ping-pong would have made for a better dialogue, but also might have helped to understand the dynamic a bit better because it would almost be like that. I really like the way that you then take a role and say, why is it important to insert role here, and then that will help you get to the rule. And starting the rule with I must. The other thing, Daniel, I was wondering, is it okay if the rule is if then? If they get angry, I must swallow mine. If they get angry, then I must be the one to, what's really fascinating is I'm looking at the sheet that I did in the session, which, as I say, haven't amended, and it's actually not bad. It's just that I'd lost sight of what it was that we were trying to do. It's definitely clumsy and clunky, but actually hearing you two go through this, I realized that most of this is there in a functional way. And then the thing that is really the penny drop moment was, one of the reasons we do this is, very, very gently to reveal to our clients how they're creating the problems that they're experiencing here. How are they co-creating the problems they're experiencing here? That was like far from my thoughts in this moment in time. But when I look at what I did do, that question could, that question would be really, I think, illuminating to JT. And he can sort of say, yeah, and that's just the price I have to pay for this relationship. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But, that's useful that you know that rather than it be all them. Or they might go, yeah, maybe there's a better way I can have this relationship. Should they want that? So that was, the teaching and then looking at what I did was super helpful. There was lots of penny drop moments there. Thank you both.
I like that turn of phrase. That's a Britishism, a penny drop moment.
All right, okay. I
I've
was just
not
thinking
heard
as I
it,
said it. Yeah.
but as soon as you said it, I got it. Oh, yeah, that's satisfying.
Yeah.
I've had that experience. Yeah. Yes, and I might elaborate a bit on what you're saying. The way that I like to conceptualize that is not how they're creating the problem or co-creating, how they're co-creating the relationship.
Yes.
I'm not going to judge any of that yet.
Yes.
There's a wonderful book, The Good Marriage, that I recommend to you. Forget the author's name currently, but she writes about like 4 different kinds of marriage. One of them is the rescue marriage. There's a damsel in distress and a knight in shining armor. That couple, if they're comfortable in the roles, report as high level of satisfaction as the companionate marriage, where we both, do emotional housekeeping and physical housekeeping and money getting. So I don't want to pathologize or judge. Some people, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually typed out, although I said it back to you, the problem, I'm glad you're highlighting, I typed out co-creating the relationship, and you're absolutely right, because the mistake I made was thinking this person had a problem, and he didn't. It was just it wasn't really a problem for him, it was just heavy, which is why I think the empathy would have worked. But yeah, it's really, this nuance is so vital, so useful.
I think so, yeah. For us to realize any relationship, my own marriage included, is both a problem and a solution.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So the way we relate to each other solves certain things and creates certain problems, pretty much across the board, right? That's the reality. And we're not going to get ahead of ourselves in terms of pathologizing or fixing something. We want to understand something. And maybe then we'll understand there's nothing to fix. There's no pathology. It's just 2 human beings relating in the way that they relate, right? Yeah. So that would be one piece. Another would be going back to the question, why are we doing this? I will do this with patients without their permission if I think I need to understand what's happening here. Let's say I'm working with a patient and he becomes enraged with me, and I don't get it. Like, what? I will just say, JT, something important is going on here. I'd like to understand it. What am I doing? Tell me what I'm doing right now. Oh, you're telling me what to do. Oh my God. You're right. Let's write that down. Right? So I will use it as a way to extract necessary clinical data so that I can do my job. In that direction, it's also an empathy exercise. Once I have the DNA of my relationship with a patient or another human being, I can empathize in a more global way with them. I can kind of get what's going on over there. Oh, of course you're suffering. Of course you're enraged. You have this role, right? And that puts you in a role. And if I had the role and was in the role, I too would be enraged. I'd probably be, homicidally enraged. You're way ahead of me. I'm not dead. And so you bring more compassion and patience to the moment than I would bring, and so forth. So then once all of that's out of the body mind of the person on a page, we can both look at and agree, yeah, that's what we're looking at. Then the question would emerge. And the question that emerges for me is, JT, what comes up for you as you look at that template? Mm-hmm. That's all the more finger I'd want to put on the scales. I hear therapists say, yeah, do you want to change any of these or ask different, more granular inquiry? I don't do that. I just say, what comes up for you? What feelings, what memories? Oh my God, it's like me and Dad. I never saw that before. Well, surprise, surprise, right? So then we'll be good listeners again maybe be good empathic people again, empathizing with what it was like to grow up with a domineering, tyrannical father. Yeah, we haven't touched on that yet. Let's touch on that. That's nothing more important than that. And out of that conversation, there may be an agenda that would emerge about rewriting some of the rules. I would redirect people there if they said, I want to get out of this role. I'd say, I think the quickest way out of this role is to change the rule.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're fighting against yourself if you're trying to change a role and hold on to that role. You have to be in that role. Would you want to change that role? And then we're off on the agenda setting adventure as regards making that change. Yeah. Has this been helpful, Dan?
Oh, I can't tell you how helpful it's been. Yeah, it's been immensely helpful. I just wonder for the rest of the group whether people do want to see. I think I've got an opportunity to share. I keep referring to the list, and I just wondered if people wanted to see what it was that I was referring to.
You want to share your screen with us, Dan?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be very generous. Thank you.
So this is. Yeah, so this is the Exhibit A, for want of a better term, and I mean, I like looking at it now. I think it's sort of not too bad. The rules definitely need refining, for sure. But really, the important thing that comes across to me was just. It was just all out of context. This was done out of context, and that's what made it out to sea. To go back to our original metaphor.
Mm-hmm. Would love to invite our community in for any feedback or perceptions you'd want to share, seeing some of the actual clinical material here.
I just want to say, considering this is one of your first entrees into using this tool, you were on point on a lot of these, areas. And I never even thought of using this whole box of feelings here. I haven't used the electronic form that much in the for the IDPA. So that's pretty cool how how they could just check the box, because then you're not going to miss anything. You're going to get most of what they're feeling. Oh yeah, no, not those. These. Right.
Yeah. Now you know why I said I was reasonably confident about that box, because it really was all there for me.
Yeah. And I just had a couple other thoughts real quick, unless somebody else wanted to speak up about the Daniel's question. I will say that this form, the ones that have been most impactful for me is the ones where somebody's in a relationship in which their partner is has some kind of addiction, because the dependency, codependency stuff comes out pretty clearly, even though we don't necessarily have to call it that, right? And when you get to they're uncomfortable, they're unhappy, they don't want to leave, they don't want the status quo, right? And they're hesitant about getting closer, but this whole rules and relationship allows them to start setting some boundaries if they choose to do so. And that setting of boundaries is going to change the dynamic in the relationship. So either the person who is the non-addictive person is going to finally live life a little better, and not be overcompensating for the other person near as much, but the other person is either going to have to stop the addiction or they're going to get worse in their behavior, right? And either way, it's good information for the patient that you're serving. And that might move them in one direction or another. So that is kind of an in-between between that status quo and that starting to shift and change things. So they're living more in a more healthy way. The last thing I want to point out is, when we're doing that agenda setting with a relationship, even after they've described, okay, the choice is instead of status quo or instead of leaving the relationship, I want to get closer. We still want to do that paradoxical piece. Yeah, I've got some great tools. I've got some great communication tools. I've got this thing that helps kind of set the rules and the roles. But before we do that, I want to make sure, because your partner's doing a lot of things that are not fair. They're making their fair share of mistakes here. And it's not quite fair that you'd be doing all this work and they'd be benefiting from your work. So are you sure you want to do this? And a lot of times that's where the rubber meets the road, right? And they'll be like, yeah, you're right. And they might back out at that point, right? Yeah, screw it. I'm not going to. Or they might argue back. And we need to hear the argue back. So I just wanted to point that out, just to remind everyone.
Yeah, Dan, it seems like a lot of I see kind of the rule there. I must distance myself if someone, I must distance myself to keep myself safe from someone's anger. But it seems like a lot of those are actually roles, that there might be a kind of a rule or guiding principle underneath.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Harrison. Good eye there. I must distance myself.
Yeah.
So there's some avoidance that goes on. So we could call out the specific avoidance. I must swallow my anger. I must avoid this person in some way, or avoid some part of myself to be in relationship with them. That would be the role. That's what we could observe happening. And then there'd be the rule driving the role. So the analogy that I use, I try and remember what sports we're playing these days. I think there's some baseball happening. So at least in the US, there's always soccer happening in the UK, right, Dan?
Always.
24/7, yeah. Well, let's go with the UK example. So someone kicks a ball and someone standing in front of a net catches it. We now have the roles. This person kicks a ball, that person catches it in front of the net. But to understand those roles, we need to know the rule book. Why are you kicking the ball? Oh, because you're supposed to get goals. Oh, let's write that down. Why are you catching it? Oh, you have to prevent getting goals. I must not let the ball go in the net. Now I understand the meaning of the role. So it gets tricky, particularly with teletherapy, because role sounds like role.
Yeah.
So that further bedevils things. But yeah, but that would be the art of the thing, getting at the behavior and then the rationale for the behavior. And I think it's all here on the page. Yeah. Well, thanks to all of you for being in the role of co-learning with all of us here this afternoon. It's a nice role to be in. I'm glad I'm in it too. Learn something a bit more each time we get together. And I guess the role behind that for me would be, I had better continue to be part of a learning community. My life, my work, my sense of self is better when I learn stuff from people. I learn stuff with people. So thanks to each of you for enabling me to do something that I had better do. And I'm already looking forward to reconnecting with each of you next week.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Till then, yeah.